Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, how are you today? I hope you are all fine and healthy. In this opportunity, we are going to discuss about interculturality analysis in short story in the Chinese restaurant. But firstly, let me introduce myself and my partners. My name is Halizah Ayuni M, and there are my partners Muhammad Iqbal, Safina Hilmiadini, Musa Adatur R, Dewi Wardah, Puja Ananda, Fatimah Al-Azizah, Imelsa Dewi, and Nur Laila A.S. First point will be presented by Musa Adatur R. Time is yours.
I am Musa Adatur R, my ID number 193200036. I will explain the summary of such story The Chinese Restaurant, and it will be analyzed by our group. In January 2000, there were two incidents. The first incident is I spent 2 weeks in China with my family. Our trip was with a Swiss group. When we arrived in Beijing, we visited various historical sites, popular area as well as the city center. On the third day, we decided to stay. On the following day, we along a river to magic place called Guilin. Once there, one evening we decided to have a nice dinner at the hotel restaurant. We assumed communication would be easier, being in an international environment. We decided to order wine. We want a particular brand we had tried in another restaurant in the city. However, the waiter just nodded confusedly. They didn't realize what they want. Since there were no bottles around to point at and our bodily gesture were not having the desired effect, I produced a drawing of a wine bottle. Also this time my efforts were not rewarded. By this time, the water had already plunged into an impenetrable silence that made us realize there was no way we could get our message across. I was very frustrated, and although they probably didn't have any type of wine, after all, the failed attempt at communicating with the waiter had given us a sense of alienation. In other words, we felt far removed, almost isolated from the reality of the place and its culture in that instance. The second incident is I attended a course on racism, which we spent in a nearby restaurant. I was sitting near a young man from Chad who had been living in Switzerland for several years. When it was time to pay for our meals, the person paid for my beverage. Quite spontaneously, I reached for my wallet with intention to pay him back, but he declined to dismiss me with a brisk gesture that betrayed some kind of indignation from his part. Even if just a bottle of mineral water, it didn't feel right to let him pay for me. This state of affairs made me feel awkward and strengthened my determination to pay him back. So, during the coffee break, I started to talk about this misunderstanding openly. He told me that Europeans are a bit too cold and direct and should not be so formal. I explained to him that I could not avoid feeling bad, and the desire to pay him back stemmed from a natural social reflex. In describing this situation, I'm possibly understanding it better. The young man just wanted to show his sympathy, and his gesture was just part of his desire to start a new friendship.
Verbal and nonverbal communication. So, in this occasion, I will no longer discuss the kinds of intercultural communication and verbal and nonverbal, because in group 1 and also Mem Kalu have already explained. So this time I discuss and analyze the verbal communication used in the story. The first is when the narrator wants to have a dinner at a restaurant where he assumes that the organized place has good service quality, including good communication in cross language, because he assumed they aware of the diversity of guests they have. Instead of having an effective conversation with the waiter staff, the narrator couldn't convey what he meant. The waiter just nodded confusedly. And the second one is occur in the description of the second incident, in which the narrator offers a cappuccino in exchange for money, with the Chadian man refuses. He had a conversation he had a conversation with him about the incident, which caused an uneasy and heavy feeling to the narrator. From the conversation, the Chinese man explained that it was common in his home country, in his culture, to give behavior like that. They don't ask for anything in return, or everything or something in return. This conversation had quite impact on the narrator. He began to understand why the Chinese man felt offended when he was about to exchange his money, and again, the narrator was relieved after giving him a cappuccino to ease his feelings.
Okay, next discussion we will discuss about nonverbal communication. Here I already defined the nonverbal communication in this part of short story, and the text is signed. There were no battle around to point at, and our bodily gestures were not having the desired effect. I produced a drawing of a wine bottle. Also this time, my efforts were not rewarded, so I indulged in my drawing activity, ending up with a very rustic wine grape. By this time, the writer had already fallen into an impenetrable silence that made us realize there was no way we could get our message across. In this text, I have underlined the word bodily gesture, drawing of a wine bottle, and impenetrable silence as a non-verbal communication. And the next, here the analysis of each non-verbal communication. The first gesture is when the speaker makes bodily gesture to explain the kind of wine bottle he want to order, because there were no bottle around him to point out. He has tried to explain and describe a wine bottle using bodily gesture, but he failed. It is because the cultural and background differences between the speaker and the writer that the message conveyed is not well captured. So the second gesture is when the speaker tries other nonverbal communication by drawing a wine bottle. When he draws, he wants to convey the drink he wants to order through a picture. Even though his drawing activity ended up with a fairly rustic wine grape, the writer still doesn't understand the order he means. Furthermore, the last gesture is when the writer had already plunged into an impenetrable silence, and the writer does this action to show that he could not understand the message. If the writer understands, then he will immediately go and get the other that the speaker wants.
Okay, my name is Nur Laila A.S. I will present the analysis of the story. In both incidents, misunderstanding may relate to different dimensions such as psychological, religious, or social dimension. Didn't really know Chinese nor studies culture. In both incidents, it is more psychological or emotional in nature, but many have to do with different interpretation of certain value. The different pattern of behavior that exists between women and men, and between elderly and young people. For example, in a Chinese wedding, might prefer father or mother to ask for wine,
and not me as a young woman.
Cultural conflict. A cultural conflict is a dislike, hostility, or struggle between communities who have different philosophies and ways of living, resulting in contradictory aspirations and behaviors. Cultural conflict including first, discrimination. It happens when someone or groups treating someone differently or unfairly based on their culture, race, religion, or etc. The second is misinterpretation. This happens when people from different cultures communicate or interact with one another. People from one culture act according to their norms and values, but the other doesn't understand the message the way it was conveyed and might interpret differently due to the different culture. This misinterpretation also occurs when a word, gestures, or social context have different meanings in different cultures. The third is stereotypes. According to Franzoid 2008 in Social Psychologist's book, stereotypes are beliefs about people who put them into one category and do not allow for individual variations. The stereotypes affect how a person processes and interprets information. The last is judgment, that is a phenomenon of a person forming opinions of other people. One of the cultural conflict that happened in this short story both, that is misinterpretation. This misinterpretation happened when the writer and his family, who is European, traveling to the China, and after traveling with their group, they decided to have a nice dinner at the hotel's restaurant where they thought the communication would be easier because it is in international environment. As you know that hotel is a place that where the foreigner or tourist come to stay when they are visiting a country. And after in the restaurant, the writer and his family tried to order some menu like a bottle of wine, but because the writer and his family didn't speak Chinese, it's difficult to them to communicate with the waiter to order the menu. So the writer started to make a gesture like drawing a wine of bottle because there is no bottle around them. So the waiter just got confused what the writer means by those gesture. So this case make a cultural conflict that is misinterpretation, where the people from different cultures communicate each other, but one of them doesn't understand the message that conveyed by one of them.
Next, about stereotypes. The young men from Chad thought that Europeans are too cold and detached and shouldn't be so formal to other people. That is why the young men pay for the writer beverage to make a new friendship. Next, the situation of paying a beverage let the writer talk about the young man's financial situation. Because he was an immigrant from Chad, the writer thought that the immigrant might have insufficient financial, so that the writer would feel guilty if he did not pay back the young man.
Okay, I will talk about strategy and I will explain about misinterpretation. I will explain the first problem and second problem. In the first problem is about three texts, three sentences. This conflict happened when the writer who is European traveling with his family to China. Second, one evening they decided to have dinner at the hotel's restaurant where they assumed communication would be easier because in an international environment. Third, the restaurant waiter did not understand what the writer's family's order. And the strategy that we use is they should use body language as a non-verbal communication to help the conversation, and it would be helpful if they hired an interpreter to help them with verbal communication, so they can rent a translator like that. Next is second problem. In the second problem, there are three sentences. During the coffee break, a young man from Chad paid for the writer beverage, but the writer had an intention to pay him back. The young man made the writer felt guilty and awkwardness because he paid the beverage with stranger. The young man just wanted to show his sympathy, and his gesture was just part of his desire to start a new friendship in his culture. And the strategy that we use is the writer should be open with the other culture. The writer should start a conversation like saying thank you to the young man, maybe appreciate the young man like that. And from that, the writer will know the reason why the young man paid for him. So uh, we should be thankful to somebody like that.
The case 3. The problem is the young man from Chad thought that European art too cold and detached and shouldn't be so formal. So this case can be categorized as a stereotype because the young man from Chad thought that European art too cold and detached before he knew more deep about European people. It's like making a stereotype to the European people and making prejudice before he knew the fact. So the strategy is the young man should open with new people. He should learn about thinking before giving off prejudice against strangers.
Okay, my name is Nur Laila A.S. I will present the analysis of the story. In both incidents, misunderstanding may relate to different dimensions such as psychological, religious, or social dimension. Didn't really know Chinese nor studies culture. In both incidents, it is more psychological or emotional in nature, but many have to do with different interpretation of certain value. The different pattern of behavior that exists between women and men and between elderly and young people. For example, in a Chinese weather, might prefer father or mother to ask for wine and not me as a young woman.
On the other hand, based on both incidents, it is our view that we are sometimes influenced by our cultures to think, for example, that some behavior is rude, but if we feel that the other person has good intentions, we may accept it even if it goes against the acceptability of our cultures. In my opinions, the most important concept we should consider are respect and humility. We must be careful with ethnocentric interpretations and ask ourselves whether our point of view can be questioned by others. Maybe that is enough of our presentations, more or less. Sorry for all the mistakes. Hopefully what we have said can be useful for all. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.